Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Bill. This is Pete. We're going to talk about ecological stewardship. I use terms like stewardship and natural assets rather than management and natural resources because assets are things that we want to pass on to our children. Stewardship is taking care of those things rather than manage them for extraction. So just a couple of things on terminology, why I use that. So Peter is a partner at Conservation Works. I'm a senior associate at the Collaborative, which is a landscape consulting firm. We'll start out just by talking about the need for ecological stewardship. Obviously, we're wanting to preserve and enhance the ecological assets or values, biodiversity, land management practices, and then we also want to nourish those ecosystem services. So the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, all comes from the environment. And then there's public use and enjoyment, getting people onto our land, having them engaged. So an ecological stewardship plan starts with inventory and assessment. Many properties have a baseline survey, many don't. Then there's sources of information, and I'll go through some of these as we go along. eBird and iNaturalist are both good ones. Then after you know what your property's assets are, you can go into recommendations about how it should be managed. So what are the goals for management? What past management activities have occurred? What's been the history of the site? Then you can go into management of each habitat or natural community. I'll be talking about each of these things a little bit more. Public use and trails, priorities. Most of us are working for very small land trusts, even if you're working for large ones. Limited resources are really a big problem. We have a huge platter of things we'd like to be doing, but we need to prioritize and make sure we're focusing on the most important ones. And then a schedule of management activities and cost estimates for that. So the ecological assets inventory and assessment, as I said, baseline survey, if one exists, is great. But then you start digging deeper. So these subjects, I'll go into each one of them in a little bit more depth, but they all play a role in the inventory of the property that you're thinking about. Also, another thing I want to be saying is not every property needs an ecological management plan. We used to call it watchful benign neglect. You want to keep your eye on the property, but some of them probably are just fine being passively managed. So geology, soils, topography, bedrock geology can help tell the story of a property. For example, limestone bedrock is often associated with rare plants. Prime agricultural soils, something that maybe wants to stay in agricultural use. Topography and soils tells us about slope, drainage, where trails ought to be. All of this can be sort of summarized in text in a plan. All of the maps that I'm showing in this slideshow are from Mass Mapper. Takes no GIS skill to use those maps. Takes a little bit of familiarity with getting to use it, but these are not high-level GIS maps. They're just things that I pull off Mass Mapper. So natural communities, there are 106 distinct types in 3 different categories in Massachusetts. There are 48 terrestrial communities. Cultural grasslands is an example of that. Wetland communities, there are 49 of those. Shrub swamp might be an example of that. And then their estuarine environments, salt marsh would be an example of that. So the Guide to Natural Communities of Massachusetts is online, and each one of the 106 communities has a fact sheet like this. It tells you about, it describes the property, gives characteristic species, gives what's called the S rank, S1 to S5. S1, 2, and 3 are usually associated with rare species, and the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program wants to know if you have an S1 or 2 property. Most of us don't have those, but some of you probably do. How to tell the community from other closely related communities is in this fact sheet. There's a map about where it occurs in the state. And then there's also habitat for associated fauna that would occur on this type of community, and a public place where you can go and see that community and visit it and get to know about it. So the Mass Mapper land cover layer is helpful in determining natural communities, but it only has 23 different land cover types, and several of those are residential and commercial. So you need to do a lot of on-the-site work to distinguish a community. And so the map that's up there is from the Mass GIS land cover, or Mass Mapper land cover layer. And then communities have been identified on there. So there's forested wetlands, cultural grasslands, which a lot of people call meadows or hayfields. From an ecological point of view, we lump them all together into a term called cultural grasslands. Cultural because it takes us to manage them. There are very few natural grasslands in New England. So almost all of the grasslands that we see in Massachusetts take management. The DEP wetlands layer has 27 categories of wetlands, so that helps. And then all of this, as I say, is sourced from Mass Mapper. So I just mentioned something there that I want to underline a little bit. Over 40 endangered rare species in Massachusetts require disturbance of some kind of management. And their future is dependent upon us managing land in one way or the other. That could be fire, it could be forestry, it could be maintaining a grassland. So another thing that's on the Mass Mapper website is interior forest areas of forest cover that are relatively unfragmented. Prime forest land, that's land that would grow good forest, whether it is forested or not. And both of those are an indicator of the quality of the site for forest growth. So another really good resource, especially for knowing your property's assets, is the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program and the Nature Conservancies Program, Biomap. And Biomap has a very robust website. It identifies lands most important for maintaining biological diversity in several categories. Core habitat identifies areas that are critical for long-term persistence of rare species. Critical natural landscape identifies large landscapes that are minimally impacted by development and that enhance, that serves as buffers to the core habitats and serves as connectivity and resilience. And then there's also on the Biomap website, the Habitat Restoration and Management Center, which you can also access through the web. It has recommendations for managing especially S1, S2, and S3 habitats, but they're also open to questions and want to help with land trusts and conservation commissions in their management. So then, even more important is the priority and estimated habitats, natural heritage and endangered species programs. These are protected habitats and state-listed rare species. And if you're doing activity in these areas, you'd need to seek approval from the Conservation Commission and the Endangered Species Program. The State Wildlife Action Plan is another resource. It plays an especially big role in assessment of your site. Once you've sort of gotten through knowing what your site is, it is a plan that's required by Congress. It's updated every 10 years. The 2025 edition identifies 620 species of greatest conservation need and 35 natural communities that support these species. So it's really an important guide for our efforts in conservation. Examples of species of greatest conservation need: eastern meadowlark, rusty blackbird, eastern spadefoot frog, silver-haired bat, bobcat, and there are 450 species of plants on that list. So how do you get information on wildlife? Well, eBird is one resource. You can check your site or nearby hotspots. If there's a nearby hotspot that has similar habitat to yours, you might get a list of birds from that, from eBird, that would be at least a place to start with what might be occurring on your site. This is just one site in Great Barrington with 161 species. The bird list of the 161 is there. A local bird club might be another resource, or individuals. Sometimes the property owner has records of bird sightings, the previous property owner. iNaturalist is another resource for getting a list of species. You can draw a rectangle or a circle around your location. Some sites may have a geographic project area already defined. The colors represent different taxa: plants, insects, mammals, fungi. I only use research grade. Research grade means that it's been verified by multiple confirming participants. You don't want to use just something that anybody's sort of seen on the site. You want to use research grade. And it'll give you a list. So after you've gathered information on the communities and wildlife of your site, you then might want to go into assessment. So I do an assessment of each natural community on the site, a description, typical associated species, species observed, either eBird, iNaturalist, or on-site or surveys, the S rank of the property, of the community, the species of greatest conservation need, if we've found some of them. So all of that sets into the assessment, as does issues that may impact stewardship. So habitat fragmentation, for example, if you had two fields that were separated by a hedgerow, by removing that hedgerow, you might have a field big enough to attract grassland birds. Climate change is another issue that all of us are now dealing with more and more. It used to be that we didn't think about climate change as a big issue. Now it is. Trails that impinge on a priority habitat that maybe ought to be relocated. And then there's obviously going to be other issues. So ecological stewardship recommendations come next. So what are the goals and objectives for your stewardship? What are the rules and regulations that your land trust or other body that you're working with have? What are the safety concerns? Are there threats and opportunities? I mentioned climate change. Deer browse is another one. And somebody was asking me earlier about hunting on conservation land. Deer browse is a really big problem Deer just nibble away at saplings of oaks and wildflowers, and they've changed habitats immensely as hunting pressure has declined. So, for example, Mass Audubon has a vetted hunter program on many of their sites to reduce deer populations. It's something we all ought to be thinking about because of the problem. Past management is another part of the recommendations. Just a list here of things that increase resilience of our sites, reducing non-climate stressors, things like controlling invasive species or reducing deer populations, restoring form and function. An example there is removing a dam to encourage fish spawning upstream, increasing complexity, creating microclimates. More diversity on the site means more habitat for more species. Creating linkages. Can you connect to nearby lands to create corridors? So each natural community gets a stewardship recommendation if it needs it. Management of non-native invasive species may be a piece of that. Wildlife enhancement, recreation management, so trails, use. One of the things that I find on a lot of our conservation land is there are probably too many trails. So critically evaluate your trail system and can you get rid of some of those trails? Because there is an impact. Recent studies sort of show that a trail corridor impacts the forest 300 feet on each side of the trail. So being critical of your trail system is an important step. Stewardship of each habitat type. So grasslands, we could spend a whole hour program talking about management of grasslands. Can't get into it today, but if it comes up a little bit more in questions, I think Pete and I can both talk about grassland management a little bit. Forests, passive management, not a bad option, but there are active management opportunities as well. DCR and Mass Audubon are working together on foresters for the birds and climate smart forestry. So Foresters for the Birds works, it's a program that is aimed at enhancing bird habitat through sustainable forest management. Climate smart forestry is a program that increases the carbon storage benefits from forests by management activities. Wetlands, if there is much management of wetlands, sometimes I've had wetlands where there are invasive species. You need to get permission from the local conservation commission to do that. And then unforested uplands. So all of those could be areas that you want to talk about in your management plan. This is a slide that I've borrowed with permission from Christian Marks of Mass Audubon, and it shows fragile to anti-fragile tree species in central Middlesex County. So the ones on the left are going to be more impacted by climate change. The ones on the right are actually going to be benefited by climate change. And this is a projection for 2050. The ones at the bottom left and right are either resilient or resistant to impacts of climate change. I find this a really interesting slide and one that I use a lot when I'm talking to people about forest management. Our forests are going to change. Non-native invasive species, there's 79 introduced plant species of the hundreds that have been introduced, actually more than that, that have been introduced, but 79 of them are problems. Why are they a problem? They outcompete, displace, and even kill native species. They lack any kind of control of their place of origin that might have kept them in check, and they provide almost no resources for any of our native species. So people will look at a Norway maple and notice the leaves haven't been chewed on. It's because none of our insects are adapted to chew on those leaves. Coevolution, really important. Wildlife enhancement, just a list of things that you might consider. And Pete's going to get into a couple of these a little bit more. Restoration, prescribed burn. So once you've got sort of your recommendations for the management of each community type, what are the priorities? And it'll vary with each site, each community type probably. But again, because we have limited resources, we need to make decisions based on priorities. So I usually give in a management plan first priority, second priority, and third priority, with the idea that we'll start at first priority and try to get those things under control. If we get those, we can go to second priority and third priority. Often we never get beyond first priority. I hope more resources become available for managing land, but we're all struggling with the same issues. Then a schedule of activities. It'll again vary with each community type. There are going to be yearly ongoing activities for some community types, short-term projects, long-term projects. I've been working for about 5 years on removing buckthorn from one of our properties. It's hand-pulling work, and it's an ongoing, long-term project. We'll keep at it. Root sprouts. Can't get all the roots all the time, and we're not using herbicides on that particular site. So you can use all of that scheduling information to develop an annual budget. You can also use it for fundraising goals. And there are some funding sources. The Mass Wildlife Habitat Management Grant Program is a program that might provide money for S1, S2, and S3. They might consider some others, but if you have any of those 3 community types on your land, I would recommend that you go to the Mass Wildlife Habitat Management Grant Program and see what they might do. There's also a DCR Forest Stewardship Program, and there used to be a federal program from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I doubt if they're getting any money these days. So one thing that I don't want to forget is monitoring and follow-up. This is not a one and done kind of thing. You need to have the commitment to make revisions based on results and keep going. I'm going to turn the podium over to Pete, who's going to talk a little bit more about some examples of things we've been talking about.
Great. Good morning. So great to be here. Bill covered a lot of ground. What I want to do is, is go through some specific projects we're kind of billed as focusing on success stories. These are not so much success stories as they are getting to the stories in the first place. How you can go about collecting information and assembling experts or community people who can help with the project. And so is that all visible? If you look at these, we're still on your...
Nope, that's yours.
Okay, good. So these are just a few suggestions for how to approach a given project. And what I'm going to do is start with, let's see if the next, well, 3 different projects I'm going to talk about. A 2.2 million acre project, a 1 acre project, and a 1,000 acre project, and mention a couple of long trails. The reason I'm putting up Yellowstone, let's get out of the valley here for a minute. I know this is a little far-fetched, but my son and I are actually going out under a contract to Yellowstone in May to join 20 inner city kids from Lowell, from the middle school, Robinson Middle School. The school has been doing this for 10 years. And our job is to prepare a documentary film of their encounters with wildlife out there and with the park. So they'll be there for a good part of a week. They'll be out with the rangers. They'll be looking at different parts of the park and what's going on. Obviously, wolves are a big draw, the bison. And the reason I'm putting up this up here also is that, I should say, this is a contract between the Yellowstone Forever Foundation, which serves the park, and the Summer Star Foundation in Boylston. Shalyn Liu, you might know, started the Rockport Performing Arts Center, and she's been super busy as a benefactor of these Yellowstone projects, and conservation works. So a few points here. First of all, Yellowstone represents a situation a lot like many of the big properties you'll see in our area, in that you're not talking just about the core area, which in this case is the park. You're talking about all of the surrounding lands, and out there this is known as the GYE, the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. I'm sure a lot of you have been out there, but the movement of animals through this entire area depends on the proper management of all of these sites together. And there are untold numbers of people who have been working on this general area. One of the other themes I want to talk about is getting young people into stewardship and into information collecting. There's the Yellowstone Forever runs a summit every year, Yellowstone Summit, which is a collection of presentations you can get as webinars online. Fantastic stuff. I mean, you're hearing from each of the scientists who have spent years and years and years with constant observation. I mean, Rick McIntyre has been observing wolves ever since they were reintroduced to the park 30 years ago, and his books are fantastic. But then you get a lot of young people who are working on their dissertations or their masters who are out there taking notes and following the details of these animal lives. And I think these are ideas that we should be thinking about locally, because the tendency is to get out there and make lists and take pictures and move on. But what we're really talking about there, to intensively understand a site, is to, as they say, sit down for 4 hours. Don't snap your picture and move on. Stay in one place and watch these things that are going on. I'll show you the project we had here in Leverett and Sunderland, and we made those lists, and we compiled a lot of info, but this was really just a start, because there's so much else you can learn about a site before you jump into management. I'll go on. Okay, so this is a really fun project we had recently, and when I said involve young people, these are really young people, and they're so much fun to work with. So these folks, the 5th grade with Chester Elementary School, which is a little school up in the hills here, have a teacher and a guidance counselor and a principal who are all super interested in getting the kids outdoors. So how can we make use of their interest? And what we did was work with the class. The specific project is there's about a 200-foot trail that goes from the school down a steep slope to the Westfield River. And we're talking land that has rare species identified by biomass. We're talking about the riverfront zone. And then the characteristics of the property are a steep slope with a lot of invasives. So the idea is, how could the kids become involved in dealing with the trail and with the invasives? So after meeting with the kids, they were assigned by their teacher, come up with a plan, a plan for dealing with the invasives without herbicides. And we had to get the permitting done. Conservation Commission reviewed this, and they sounded, well, that's a little skeptical about that. We're in some tough country here. And Natural Heritage, same thing. Make sure you've got all your plans ready, because you could be doing the wrong thing. But then when they both heard that the kids are going to be planning the project, oh, okay, well that's good. We're going to permit this. So we got the approval. And the kids went at it. I mean, when we went back up there after the first couple of meetings, they had already tied red yarn around each invasive stem. I mean, we're talking about a good bit of Japanese knotweed along the river, and I can show you a little bit more about what the site looks like. So on the left, some Japanese barberry, and then below that, Japanese knotweed. And this project was funded by the Westfield Wild and Scenic River Committee. We've done work with them in the past on developing a new part of what's called the Highlands Footpath out there. Great group. Meredith Babcock is, I think, the head person, and she's been super interested. She showed up for the project. And then you look at the trail, where the reason for the trail work is that we've got a very steep section that is impassable in the winter because it's too steep and slippery, and it's erosion prone because it follows the fall line straight down the hill. So the idea was to reroute it, and they helped with that, and then use bench cutting to cut into the slope and create a very gradual descent down to the bottom. And the kids did the work. Andy Vecchio in the lower right picture is part of Conservation Works, and he supervised the trail work. The teachers were right in there. The custodian was right in there. Everybody was involved. So it turned out well, and it's fun. And one of the things to say about it is this is just the beginning, because it's mechanical removal. They did a little digging. They did a lot of cutting. And they did the research on, well, what do we do with the material once it's cut? Do we put it in the dumpster, or do we put it in a burn pile? And they figured out what are the proper things to do. But this will leave work for every subsequent fifth grade class. They'll be back there doing more invasive work, because this obviously you're not going to get very far with one go through. But the kids are learning stuff, and it turned out well. Okay, so a couple trail projects. The Robert Frost Trail, which was our project from 40 years ago, laying out a 47-mile route, is now pretty much under the supervision of Kestrel Land Trust, but frankly, maintenance fell behind over a series of years. And we got to the point where there were something like 120 down logs over the extent of the trail. So how to get it back into shape? What we've got now is a core of about a dozen trail adopters, and they've each agreed to adopt maybe 3 or 4 miles of trail, maybe less, depending on what they're capable of, getting the overhanging brush under control, picking up the small debris, and if you wait a year and then visit, and you haven't been there for a while, there's gonna be tons of small stuff, there always is. And then referring any chainsaw work to those of us who could do the chainsaw work. And we had a system like this in Amherst years ago, where we said we had a couple dozen adopters called Ridgewalkers. And we would meet every quarterly, probably. Everybody'd share their stories. I should mention Dick O'Brien is one of our partners right here in the third row, and he's done a lot of this, the trail work all over the state, and he is terrific at assembling volunteers. So the other project is, that moved on, okay. You see the lower right picture is the summit of Crag Mountain in Northfield. Okay, so this was formerly on the main line of the NET, the New England National Scenic Trail. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the trail. It used to be the M&M Trail. And what we did a few years ago was to, and this comes under the category of stewardship, nailing down parts of the trail that are liable to be closed by private owners. And I think we came up with at least 30 properties that are vulnerable. And this was working with the Appalachian Mountain Club. And so now we know where all of them are. One of them, one part that was closed is this Crag Mountain in Northfield, which has tremendous views in both directions. It's sitting up above the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Lake Reservoir. And just to point out that we would love to get the trail reestablished. It is now down on the road below Crag Mountain because you can no longer come over the mountain because that section is closed. So how to nail down these properties by either fee purchase, by conservation restrictions, or easements, and to get ahead of these closures wherever possible. So just wanted to mention that one. Okay. So then one of our big projects over the last couple of years, we were fortunate to be approached by Chief Cheryl Holly of the Hassanamisco Nipmuc, they have now got official title to 500 acres in Sunderland on Mount Toby, Sunderland and Leverett. And if you look at the left-hand, no, I can show you the map in a minute. I see, it's just been a little reorganized, Bill. I'll have to keep up here. So on the left, what we're talking about is the number of people who are involved in what we were asked to do, which is a complete ecological assessment of 1,000 acres. So 500 is already, and I'll show you the map in a minute, is already under Nipmuc control and stewardship. The other 500 acres, 488 total actually, is planned for rematriation. And before I get too far along, because we are working with an indigenous tribe, I do want to give the land acknowledgement that was prepared after a long collaborative process by UMass, the UMass Native Advisory Council. So let me quickly read this. This land acknowledgement affirms our campus connection and relationship to the land the campus is built upon, and our continued connection to the nations who were the original inhabitants and caretakers of this land. The land acknowledgement also affirms our connection and responsibility to the 82 Native nations west of the Mississippi whose homelands were sold through the Morrill Act of 1862. The money from these sales were used to establish this campus as a land-grant institution. The land acknowledgement is part of a broader effort of building and sustaining relationships and partnerships with the Native nations to whom we as a university community are connected. And then I think the list on the previous page, this keeps moving, so let me go back here. Okay. I'm still figuring out how you reorganize this, Bill. So let me see here, sorry. Yep. Yeah, so we were fortunate to have people like Russ Cohen help with this. Russ, as you probably know, is a terrific expert on wild edibles. Dr. Rob Jagir was out with us, who's specialized in pollinators. He's from UMass Dartmouth. We had Eva Gibovic, who is the Leverett, kind of the town historian. And she knows every inch of the town. And when we would mention a stone structure out in the woods, oh yeah, I know that one. I know that one. And here's what it leads to, you know. So I think one thing just to keep in mind, as you're putting together information about a property, think about within your town, you undoubtedly have somebody who spends a lot of time out there. I mean, I'm thinking for example, Carol Enton is the head of the Rehoboth Land Trust, and Carol knows every amphibian in town. She doesn't travel. I saw her this morning, and she has in her backpack her insect net, and she's ready. And that kind of person is going to have information that is helpful. People who hunt, I mean, if you take somebody who sits for several hours in a deer stand, they know what's going on. So make sure you talk to them. Talk to abutters. How could they be involved in stewarding a particular property? You know, they're undoubtedly going to have an interest. And I'll show you a specific case here. So the sign here is what the tribe wants. We put them up for them, and they're very nice signs that identify each entrance to the larger property that's in that they already own. That's in Sunderland. This is on Mount Toby, and again, we're talking about. Let's see. Okay. All right. Here are the maps. So. On the left is the big property in Sunderland and Leverett on Mount Toby. And you can see that in green are other properties that are part of the big picture. And we did a good bit of wildlife inventorying, but one thing we didn't do is, I would love to do this, is to be able to track the movements of animals. I mean, there are bear, bobcat, coyotes everywhere, you know, lots of things going on in the wildlife world, but it's not really enough to be able to check them off the list. You really need to know what these animals, where they're denning, what roads they might have to cross, and between these two properties, Route 63 runs. It's not super busy, it's not like an interstate, but it does present an obstacle to wildlife who might want to cross. So let's see. Okay, I got it. So what we did was started with by placing remote wildlife cameras. I mean, I've worked with Sally Nazer for years, who's the real expert at this, but we were able to put up cameras in 8 or 10 places and got some very interesting stuff and a lot of animals that showed up. And among other things, we were able to inventory the people who were using these trails. One of them was, or a couple of them were on the Robert Frost Trail that runs right through the Sunderland property. And holy cow, I mean, we'd got, in the course of a few weeks, we'd get 100 runners or walkers or people with bikes. I mean, they're out there, and it is helpful to know this. I hate to intrude on people's privacy, and you know, some people don't appreciate being photographed, but and we noticed only 2 people who saw the camera, you know, and they, you know how it is. But it was helpful to be able to get the cameras out there. We took drone footage of the properties that it can be quite helpful in identifying, you know, forest tracks, other features. We did a lot of stream sampling with pH meter and thermometer to see how healthy these streams are. I mean, as climate change goes on, streams tend to warm up, and how best to keep them from losing their best habitat qualities. Zach Peterson with our group set up permanent bird census plots, and we're hoping that every June, somebody will be able to go back to each of these plots and do the 10-minute counts and see how the populations are doing. You know, where are the birds? Which species are out there? Are the dynamics changing? We inventoried invasives, a lot of other features, amount of public use, and then looked into, and really, I don't want to imply that we're going to be out there doing the stewardship. This is now going to be up to the Hassanamisco Nipmuc, and they have a volunteer, not a volunteer, a paid crew that's in this picture. So the various habitat types are just roughly shown here. There's a big logged area in the Doolittle parcel, which is the one that's going to be rematriated. There is, and it's actually fascinating habitat, and I think a lot can be done with that in terms of developing it for pollinators, maybe seeding in. One thing that we want to be conscious of is the number of stumps and down material, which can be really valuable. Most people don't think in terms of bee habitat, but something like 75% of the native bees, there's probably 700 native bee species in our region, 3/4 of them are ground nesters. And a lot of them are cavity nesters. So they need this, wood material. And so rushing in and trying to grade and get rid of those would not be appropriate in this situation. Sorry. On the right, we more or less discovered a classic heath bald and on the top of Joshua Hill. And we brought in, we were lucky to have the crew from Natural Heritage come in and give us some ideas about how that could be managed in the future to keep it as that kind of habitat with all of these ericaceous plants and keeping the trees from overwhelming the vegetation. The stewardship crew there is on the left in that cutover area, and then there's a wildfire site. There was a fire 5 years ago that took about a month and a half to put out. It just kept burning on the top of the ridge, and it changed the habitat quite a bit. Now black birch is rushing in, and so one of the challenges is how to keep that from completely overwhelming the rest of the vegetation that will green up. So we'll be talking with the group about that. Then over on the Pine Hill parcel, one of the features is this power line that runs in the lower right, which is actually very rich in terms of floral biodiversity. And we spent a good bit of time up there cataloging things. Jill Craig, down below on the left, is there doing some of the stream sampling. We inventoried specimen trees. There are a lot of big stuff out there. And then we would meet with Cheryl Holly and others of the Nipmuc when we had a chance to get out there. So here are a few ideas from or results from our wildlife cameras. And we did put together a kind of a video collage for the tribe to use in getting a better picture of what's out there. We had one neat one where the camera next to the trail recorded 2 deer in broad daylight flying through, running at top speed. And right after them, here comes a coyote running at top speed. And we're thinking, no, he's not going to catch him. But it was interesting to see. And there are a lot of other cool things going on up there, including a bear population. I would love to see if we could work with UMass and maybe the Department of Fish and Game to see if we could get some radio tagging of some of the animals like these bears. Well, what are they doing during the course of a year, and how can we be conscious of their relationship to the forest types? Here's a picture of the bird census sites, and we're hoping that will be a continuing effort. Lots of stone, don't worry about the titles here, this is small print, but lots of interesting stone structures or natural features that all tell a story. George McClure is a tribal person who came out with us, and others did as well. So then here's just a summary of our other data collection. And one thing to mention, we did inventory all the trails, and the invasives tend to be concentrated along the trails, spread by future or previous uses. But the deer herd, that says DER, the deer herd is impressive. I mean, we would get groups of 6 or 8 deer in our wildlife cameras. And even though the Fish and Game census figures are more like, all right, it's not too many. There's probably 15 deer to the square mile, which isn't too bad. I think we're getting concentrations more intense than that, especially on this cutover area. And so dealing in the future with the amount of browse that we're going to expect up there. We didn't see a lot of intensive browse, but I think that is going to be something to deal with over the years. Let's see. Fortunately, W.D. Coles, which was the previous owner, has always done a great job of boundary marking. They use their red paint blazes and they have permanent markers, and that makes life easy when you're working on finding out where you are. On the right is a picture of part of Leverett Pond, and the pond itself for years has been heavily fished, and some people say, well, it's really fished out now. Well, how could that be dealt with? I mean, this is something of interest to the indigenous folks, you know. That's something that over time I think they'll want to work with the town, which put up a dam not too long ago to control the water level and help address the invasives, and see what they can do about pond management. So, how are we doing for time? A little bit. So we have also included in our report, and we'd be glad to share the report with anybody who's interested. It covers a lot of ground, and yet it leaves a lot still to be done. So I shouldn't touch that thing. Sorry. So the idea of prescribed burns is one that the tribe would like to think about, because that, in terms of indigenous practices, is one thing that may be logical to try to control and manage the plant makeup. Restoration forestry of some kind, they're not anxious to go in and do some heavy logging, but how can they encourage species like sassafras or white oak or other things that, you know, may very well be useful? Possibly a dock and boat launch at the pond, then thinking ahead about climate change implications. Likewise, for the Pine Hill property is the Sunderland property on Mount Toby. So here are some of the ideas that we've talked to them about, including the possibility of some very limited, probably low-income type housing intended for tribal members. So I mentioned earlier the idea of making sure you're aware of and speaking with abutters. So on the map on the left, the area outlined in blue is the 97-acre property of the Mount Toby Friends meeting, Quaker meeting. They have a really active membership of at least 100, 150 people. And they have been very interested in what's going on or what will happen with the Nipmuc land and the future stewardship. And so they're arranging meetings between the two. And I think what we're looking at is the potential of joint stewardship, which would make a lot of sense. It's a very interesting property they have. You see on the upper right is a wetland area that's not too far from Route 63, and then beautiful streams and waterfalls up above. So the tribal people are quite interested in, I think, working with them. Oh, yes. Okay, so this is just to list the people who helped on this project, and going forward, we'll be very likely to work on various projects. The crew you see there with Dr. Rob Jagir in the middle was out on a pollinator walk with him during the summer, and the crew is also spending a lot of time at what's called the Pequog Farm. You might be familiar with this over in Athol. It's land that made available by the farm school. And the Hassanamisco Band is actively managing that. They're doing a good bit of planting of shrubs that they can then plant out, and doing some serious caretaking. So that, I think, is what I've got for now, and we would be glad to take corrections or comments or questions.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Obviously, a tremendous wealth of experience and knowledge. So let's have some questions. I'm sure that there are some questions out there. Sir?
One of the things you didn't touch on is the current diseases that are affecting beech and ash
Yeah.
and hemlock, and how we should be coping with that.
Yeah, the beech leaf disease is sweeping the, as you know, sweeping the
Stay
state.
focused on that.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Sorry. I know it's possible through Bartlett Tree and Harvard Forest, who are researching beech leaf disease, you can potentially head that off for individual specimen trees. Out in the woods, I think we're going to watch it just continue to knock out all these beech. It's really tough. I mean, a lot of these eastern Mass properties are just in tough shape for beech, and as you say, the ash decline and other issues. Yeah.
So to build on that, are you, sorry, but to build on that, I'm just wondering if there are any recommendations yet on underplanting. We're trying to use some of the DCR bundles on one of our properties to underplant 5 species under one particular solid beech stand to see what happens,
Paul might want to comment on that one.
Yeah, so planting is something that we don't have a ton of experience with over the last couple decades, but it's certainly becoming more important or more of a viable option with issues like invasive plants, invasive insects, and so forth. So we have a new publication out at the UMass Mass Woods table on planting to enhance resilience and diversity and so forth. I would just add one thing while I got the microphone. Let's not let these species go. There are some great efforts going on in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Vermont and things where they're establishing patch reserves across the landscape of these species. We don't want to let them go.
Good point.
Quick follow-up on the beach, if I may. So are these species that close to home here, but they're gonna grow up and start to die and decay, but will they keep coming back up, to a certain age, and then all die? As opposed to just being decimated.
Yeah, as you probably know, beech tend to sprout like crazy, and we're seeing the sprout mortality right up there. They as soon as they come up, they're knocked out. So, yeah.
TBD. Keep all of our options open.
I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the monitoring around some of the management planning and stuff, and how you've approached that with developing monitoring schemes that are meaningful but appropriate for the resource levels that or capacity that land trusts or property owners may have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crux of the issue, really. There's so few resources going into monitoring that I don't have anything to offer other than it's a need and it ought to be part of the plan. What more can I say? I mean,
I'll just say that there are some organizations like the Acton Conservation Trust that are super diligent about monitoring. I mean, we go out with a group every year and visit at least 8 of their conservation restrictions. Take the photographs, check on the boundary monuments, look at the condition of, the open fields, and so on. And it really keeps them right on top of things. And I think a lot of towns have that capability if they get the volunteers out there. A lot of land trusts are doing the same thing. Conservation Works. Our company gets out there and does a lot of that.
but is there a repository? Can we feed data to anyone to make it useful?
not that I know of. I mean, I think that's a project that the Land Trust Alliance could be sort of working on. But as a board member of an individual small land trust, I mean, we go out and do our annual monitoring of each of our sites. But again, the paperwork is there. We use it to sort of use, we're moving towards using it to do our annual budget, but even that we haven't gotten under control yet.
I think it is a good idea, though, maybe to set up some kind of a Google Docs, chart that people all over could benefit from. What's going on here? Or how are you dealing with problems and issues?
Yeah, thank you. Where do your groups stand on the use of synthetic herbicides in ecological management? Do you have policies, practices, best practices? Yeses and nos. Thank you.
So a lot of so towns have their own regulations. Land trusts can have their own regulations. We're all stewards of public land. If you are a steward of a public land and you want to use herbicides, you need to have a licensed applicator to do that. So that's either somebody that is trained to do that or is contracted with. Most of the invasive control work that I do, because I'm working with volunteers and I don't have a license, we're doing just mechanical stuff. So there's an interesting story about geophosphate, the Roundup, what used to be the main ingredient in Roundup. There was a report that said, this isn't a bad thing, it's not dangerous. That report was ghost written by the manufacturers. And now everybody's kind of really shy about using that. And I think even the main ingredient in Roundup is no longer that ingredient. It's, this philosophically, it's like going to a knife fight with a hand tied behind you and they've got a gun. I mean, if you want to control invasives, I think herbicides are part of the answer.
Maybe I can mention, I was down at the Southeast Mass Agriculture Conference, it must have been about a month ago, and a really terrific landscape architect, designer was there presenting on that kind of question. And he said, after so many years of dealing with herbicides and now being more and more aware of what the damage can be to microorganisms and insects, ground-dwelling creatures, he's just signed off. He said, we are now doing mechanical, and we make it work as well as we can. And as we know it's not going to be as effective, but in the long run, maybe the system benefits from it,
And for some species, there are biological controls. I'm working right now on a Conservation Commission property in Dover where we had spurge, which is listed as an invasive species by Massachusetts, and we're using beetles. So that's sort of like the purple loosestrife story. We'll see how the beetles work.
That was refreshing to hear you say about the microorganisms, so appreciate that one. Just to kind of throw another devil's advocate question at you, I'd read a book called The New Wild by Fred Pierce, which I thought made kind of a compelling case that as climate change is, increasing in pace and all that, so are the invasives. And what if we're looking at them with the wrong lens? What if they're the thing that may save us as tides rise and more carbon and so forth? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and one thought is that we've heard from indigenous folks that, don't rush in and slam the invasives. Don't start with that. Give it some time and see. Maybe these are useful in some way to indigenous folks and others. Can we find a different approach? And really, what I meant to say in my earlier remarks is that there are so many situations where rushing in is not the right thing. Sure, if we've got black swallowwort coming in, oh my gosh, that stuff can spread so fast that if you can possibly get a handle on that. But otherwise, take some time and get to know the property before you, instantly start building trails or controlling invasives or, doing a number of other things that are kind of on the top of most people's list.
Other questions? Such a phenomenal opportunity here. Take advantage.
I'm part of a small land trust, and over the past year, we've been trying to inventory our properties and try to create a tier system to focus our efforts on stewardship. And it's kind of hard because we're looking at so many different layers to it, and we use Mass Mapper a lot in that project. And I just wanted, we kind of weight them all differently, but do you have a certain map layer or thing that you look for that's sticks out to you as very important when it comes to ranking these types of properties?
I start with biomap. I mean, I think biomap is a really good effort to sort of identify the most critical landscapes. And there's now layers for local as well as state-wide significance. So I usually start there. I'll overlay that with the protected properties and see where they join. I also want to look at, so I'm working now actually in a very similar project for Conservation Commission where there's a lot of private land trust and Conservation Commission land that abut each other, and they probably ought to be managed cooperatively. But knowing what your neighbors are is really important too. I mean, they may have, an endangered species site on their property, but if it's, say, a vernal pool, the salamanders may be migrating to your property. So it's all part of one sort of network. And
Connectability a little bit?
yeah, connectability is really important. And that's another thing that the biomap layers help you see, because they try to connect a lot, even over private land. Pete?
No, that's
Could you speak more about grassland management?
Ooh, wow. As I said, that could be a whole hours-long discussion. So I want to start just by, so many people sort of say they want to create a meadow. And it's so hard because it takes so much ongoing management. It might start out easy enough looking, just throw a few seeds down and mow it every now and then. But I've had decades of experience with failures at creating meadows. And most of that is because there's not enough resources for ongoing management. So if you've got a farmer who's mowing your field, again, I'm working on a field, the spurge infested field that I'm working on with the beetles. It was being mowed by a farmer until he began not being able to use the cuttings, even for bedding, because spurge will make cows, horses sick. So now he can't use it at all. He was doing it for free. Now he's charging $2,500 a time that he mows it. So we're hoping that the beetles are going to get it back to the point where we can have it mowed for free. Who knows? But even then, is it the best for pollinators? So there's a lot of discussions right now about not cutting in the fall, because a lot of insects are using the stems of grasses and wildflowers to overwinter their eggs. And if you cut it down to 6 inches, you're probably grinding up a lot of pollinators. So, I don't know.
Yeah, just one thing to think about is if you are shooting for maximum diversity and pollinator health, you might start with goldenrods and asters, which can dominate, a field. Those are great for late season insects, late season pollinators. But what you really, I think, in general, want to aim at is, flowering during the entire season. One way, you're right about, Bill's right about the difficulty of mowing in the fall, because yes, insects can use those stems, But to refrain from mowing the flowering, plants while they're in flower is also, should be a high priority. So if you can mow in April, as soon as the ground, is not too soft and ready to mow, and if you can mow again in maybe even December, but in November, then you risk losing some of those stems, but you also probably have the best chance of more diversity during the full growing season. And maybe it means starting again and doing a new seeding. People are doing that a good bit. So there are a number of ways you can approach this. There's no instant solution, but getting that full scope of flowering season is ideal.
There's also cool season grasses and warm season grasses. Cool season grasses are mostly the imported European grasses that were really popular for feeding livestock. Our warm season grasses are mostly natives. They're still useful for feed, but usually the mowing regimes are very different. You want to mow earlier for warm season grasses, so maybe July mowing. But then if you're managing for grassland birds, you can't do that. So, it really depends on your goals.
Where did you get your beetles from, and did you need a permit for them?
Yep. So these are 4 species of flea beetles. There's a company in Montana that provides them. They're European beetles that their life cycle depends on spurge. So spurge is a European plant. These are European beetles. They're licensed for release anywhere in the continental United States without a permit. But great question.
I really enjoyed your tree chart, and I know there's a lot of, as you said, a lot of different ways to manage, and there's a balance between preservation versus restoration and building climate resilience. But on that chart, when you're replanting and restoring an area, would you lean more towards one way of that chart versus the other? So the more resilient trees that are better for climate resilience?
Yeah, I wouldn't be planting red pine or white pine. I'd be planting, shagbark hickory, some of the ones on the right side or the bottom of that chart. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about using sheep to maintain fields?
Yeah, I was having a discussion about sheep and goats just the other day. People are using goats for invasive control. Goats eat everything. They don't distinguish between natives and non-natives. So if you want to get rid of everything, and I think sheep are very similar. So I don't have any experience with sheep, but goats I know a little bit about. And, they're kind of everything. Everything's gone.
I have seen a situation where goats were brought in to control the poison ivy, and they ate everything but except for the poison ivy. It's not always predictable.
I'm going to ask a quick question here. So I think it was you mentioned the idea of prioritizing your stewardship tasks. Or, I go in and I'm going to call this priority 1, 2, and 3. How do you what are the decision points with prioritizing? And then do you just spend time, energy, and resources down from 1 to 3 as you can?
Yeah, so another great question. So the Wildlife Action Plan, if there's species on the site, especially if they require some sort of management, would rise to the highest priority. Invasives control, I might prioritize areas near trails or in fields. And as Pete was saying, the invasives often follow where people have been because they're bringing the seeds on their boots. So I would probably put lower priority to go after controlling invasive species away from trails or a field. It varies with each site and each habitat. So, yeah, if you want to know what spurge looks like, that's it on the screen. That's cypress spurge. There's also leafy spurge.
There's also the question of liability and hazards. If you've got trails that are seriously eroding or bridges that are in trouble, those have got to be high on the list.
So I'm going to bring the session to a close. I think we were talking before the session started. A few decades ago, it felt like the effort, the focus was, let's go out and conserve, which I hope it still is. But after a few decades, we've looked around and said, all right, now we've got this land, what do? How do we sustain the conservation values for which we sought to protect the land? How do we use it to engage people, indigenous partners, community members, kids? So this is a huge conversation to have, and your knowledge and experience has been wonderful, so please help me thank